Thaddeus McCotter into our studios here in the Golden Tower of the Fisher Building. Nice to see you, Congressman.
Oh, thanks for having me, Paul W.
Well, it's nice. I don't think you've been in the studios before.
No, you've been spared that.
No, I'm glad you're here. I only wish that I would have thought to ask you to bring an amplifier and your guitar.
Oh, I could have done that.
I know, and it didn't occur to me. It just did not occur to me. So next time?
Yeah, next time.
Okay.
If there is one.
You think there won't be on your account or our account? You think we won't invite you back? We'll invite you back no matter what happens here today.
Well, I appreciate that. Then I will. I will bring it.
Okay. We'll look forward to that. How are things?
Things are difficult. We saw an uptick in the new jobless claims that came out on Thursday, up to 500,000. Some of that was related to the census employees that are starting to come off the payroll. But the concern is that we may be heading towards a double dip or worse. Here in Michigan.
Yeah, we don't know anything about double dip in Michigan because we never felt we got out of it.
No, we understand in Michigan, Paul W., as we've talked about, that this is a structural change. This is not a cyclical recession. This is the full-blown impact of the changes that we've seen in a globalized economy. Michigan is a manufacturing state, just as we had in the past with cyclical recessions. We had felt it first, and we would stay sicker longer, get quicker later. Fortunately for us, we've gone through a lot of the pain already with the restructuring of the auto industry and a lot of the changes that we've had to make. But as the rest of the country continues to view this simply as a cyclical recession you can spend your way out of and have it pick up again, that means that Michigan is going to face a longer recovery period of time, even if we do everything right here.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what next we can do or should be done. We had the governor on just a bit ago from up in the Upper Peninsula. She did put forward a budget this time that did not raise taxes, and that got a lot of support, obviously, for the first time, at least we think so far from both aisles. But my goodness gracious, with $600 million in cuts and depending on $600 million one-time government dollars, we're not anywhere close to fixing our problems.
No, and that's one of the things that the state government has to do, but it also mirrors what the federal government is not doing. Again, when we talk about restructuring that's occurred, we've seen this. Ford did it ahead of the curve. We saw and felt the pain in a lot of districts, a lot of homes. You've seen families have to restructure a lot of their priorities within their own budgets. And yet government, especially at the federal level and also here at the state level, has refused to understand that it also has to make the restructuring and the priority decisions that families and businesses have had to do. In Michigan right now, what we have to understand is that the state government that we've inherited since the 1950s and 60s, that model is gone. The tax base is fundamentally different. The entrepreneurial opportunities are different. What people are looking for when they move to a state or a community is fundamentally different, and yet the state has refused, largely because it can live off of what it takes rather than what it makes, has refused to make those difficult decisions. And the incoming governor now is going to, whether it's Verge Bonero or whether it's Rick Snyder, and the incoming legislature are going to have some very difficult decisions to make.
Well, even worse decisions to make because of the bigger hole we're going to be in, depending on that government money that just isn't going to keep coming.
Well, I ran into Steve Courtney in the hallway, and he was talking about why Lions fans feel so excited. Look, we know that we may not make the Super Bowl this year, but we know there's a plan in place, and we know that a lot of the suffering that we're going to go through as fans will pay off in the long run. The next governor is going to have to make a case as to why the structural changes, the cuts, and the reprioritization of state government is going to be necessary in the short term and why it's going to be beneficial in the long run. And that, I think, is going to be the key challenge, is to lay out why the immediate changes are going to pay off in the long run for the state of Michigan. Now, Paul W., you and I would agree that the goal with Michigan is to try to create an entrepreneurial environment that keeps our kids here with job opportunities, that attracts new capital investment, new businesses, and that the state government we're going to need has to be smaller, leaner, more accountable, and more customer-friendly to citizens and to entrepreneurs and workers, instead of one that simply is in many ways, a holding pattern for people who are either getting ready to leave the state when they graduate from college or people who've already retired. We believe that model of the large industrial welfare state with the tax base that can support it is clearly not demonstrable by the facts and figures that we see out of Michigan's economy at the present time.
We have Congressman Thaddeus McCotter in the studio here on the Paul W. Smith Show at News Talk 760 WJR. Back to the Congressman in just a moment. Lucky enough to have with us in the studio Congressman Thaddeus McCotter, and he's going to stay here a little while, so he'll also take some calls or questions you might have. And our WJR toll-free number, 800-859-0957. 800-859-0WJR. And This is a unique opportunity to speak directly with Congressman Thaddeus McCotter. A couple of things. One of the things that's had the phone lines buzzing is the Ground Zero Mosque. I've not talked a lot about it. It came up yesterday when we had our open line, and I don't. I just don't believe that we should prevent somebody from doing something like this in America. That's why we are America, and that's why people have come to this country, for the freedom to do these sorts of things. I do think it's just stupid for them to put a mosque there, and I think if they had any understanding that they would take the opportunity or offer that others have given them now to build a mosque elsewhere. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is there's a lot of concern about the religious freedom aspect of this. There's also concern about where the funding is coming from. But fundamentally, as a federalist, this is a decision that has to be made by the people of New York, their elected officials. And I think that one of the things that upsets people so much, Paul W., is a lot of the hue and cry that's heard about it and how quickly it degenerates into you're either anti-this or pro-that or anti-these people. And that's not really what's going on. I think that what we have to do is, like much of the opinion that we're seeing, you have to understand that we have a country that is premised upon the concept of the free exercise of religion, religious tolerance. And in many ways what we're seeing is the fact that the type of enemy that we are engaging is viewing this in with a religious sensibility in a religious quasi, or at least an expropriated religious context. So what happens is the Americans, is the way that our enemies in the terrorist movement that exploit the Islamic religion view this is so anathema to how Americans have viewed not only themselves but their traditional enemies in the past, with the potential exception of emperor worship in Japan. So the United States has a great deal of difficulty understanding people who think essentially with a medieval mindset. And what you're seeing with the mosque is a modern American mindset that is always engaged in religious tolerance, trying to get its own mind around the nature of the enemy and making sure that we don't infringe upon fellow citizens in the attempt to try to do that.
You know, it's brilliantly put in just a very few words. We do have trouble. I certainly have trouble dealing with this medieval mindset, and that's what we're dealing with. It's why when I hear about certain things happening in other parts of the world, in sacrifices and whatever it might be in the name of religion or whatever, it's hard for me to deal with. It's hard for me to understand. I do know I don't want it here because if that's what they do, I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to like it, but I don't live there and they're doing it and whatever. But we do get concerned when that medieval mindset comes here and then lashes out at those of us who are not approaching life with that mindset.
Well, World War I for Americans was about imperialism. It was about the Kaiser, and it was understandable. It was a European conflict. It was not a religious conflict on either side. When you look at the ideologies that the United States has had to triumph over with our allies, fascism was not a religious ideology. It was garbage, but it was something that you could easily differentiate from the United States and understand in a modern context because it was considered the wave of the future, as was atheistic communism. But when we look at the enemy that we are dealing with, which I believe is actually an apostate of Islam, they are viewing this in a religious context, and modern Americans, in fact, I would argue that Americans traditionally have very great difficulty trying to understand that type of mindset because it is, again, so alien and anathema to us. What we have to do, though, is find a way to understand the nature of our enemy, and that, I think, goes a long way, no matter how hard it is, to our being able to make sure that we are secure, to our being able to make sure that liberty is expanded to defend ourselves here at home, and to make sure that situations like we're finding in New York right now are dealt with much more easily than they currently are being, and in a much more, I would argue, reasoned fashion.
Because it doesn't help our situation in the world by just standing up and saying, we don't want them to build a mosque here, or whatever stand we might be taking at the time.
You don't want to alienate people who have no sympathy at all for the terrorist enemies and are actually some of the people who are suffering the most at their hands. But you also want to make sure that Americans understand that it's a two-way street, and I think that's why even Howard Dean and some other people are saying that what we're seeing with the mosque is you have every right to do something. Does not mean that it's necessarily the best idea in the world.
Like carrying guns to Arts, Beats, and Eats. Like,
Yeah.
you have every right to do that. But does it make a lot of sense to do that? Not so sure that it does.
Yeah, my parents taught me there's two steps. You have the right to do something, but you have the responsibility not to.
It's perfect. The right to do something, but the responsibility not to.